This broadcast is the property of Codependents Anonymous. Reproduction without written permission from Codependents Anonymous is not permitted.
All right, we're ready to go. Everybody, let's welcome Kay.
Thank you, Jen. And you know what? I'm going to turn this up just a little bit. Okay. So, I'm honored to be here and to talk with you about healthy and loving relationships, which, of course, is why we all come to CoDA in the first place. We live in such a fast-paced world with breakdowns of relationships, divisions, just all these things that cause us to long all the more for healthy and loving and enjoyable relationships. So I'm so glad you all found CoDA. I found CoDA in 2016 when I was 66 years old. So I've been in CoDA for 8 years. And what I'm going to ask is a little bit about you. Well, first of all, I'm going to be grateful. I am so grateful for Bill W. and Lois and for founding our original 12-step program, Alcoholics Anonymous, and for, and for Lois for founding Al-Anon. When was it? 1951. I'm going to do this down a little more. So, and aren't we grateful for Ken and Mary? And just the way they have adapted the 12 steps for us, for Codependents Anonymous in 1986. And for this wonderful ICC committee and all the hard work they've done. And many of them work full-time, and they've still done this for us to bring us this conference. So I'd like to find a little bit about you. How many of you are brand new to CoDA, maybe a year or less? It's great. And how many of you have been in CoDA 1 to 5 years? That's great. 5 years and more. A lot of us. It's not like we ever get done. We always have to keep learning, right? So in this workshop, we're going to talk about 3 areas. We're going to talk about our higher power and how we connect. We're going to talk about loving ourselves, and we're going to talk about loving others and healthy relationships. So, and I like to keep on track here, so I'm going to sort of read a little bit here, if you can bear with me. So I love this step 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood God, praying only for knowledge of God's will for us and the power to carry that out. And I think I have that wrong there. I think it was understood God, the original. So we're going to talk about these 4 wonderful words. We're going to talk about defining our higher power, having conscious contact, and then surrender. So these words, these 4 wonderful words, we have to thank one of the 10 founding members of Alcoholics Anonymous for inserting these words. And in my opinion, they take us beyond partisanship and religion to our own spiritual awakening as we understand God. And I don't believe I don't believe the spiritual experience can be owned or even fully defined, and we'll talk more about that. We need to each have the ability to come to our own spiritual path in the way that we feel we must and works for us. So let's talk about defining our higher power. So many of us were raised with others telling us what our higher power was like and what our higher power wanted of us, what we should do. So we might have to actually deprogram ourselves a little bit from some of that. I was raised by missionary parents in the wilderness of northern Canada. I was 15. When I was 15, because there was no school where I was raised, my parents sent me away to a religious Florida boarding school. Florida because that's where my dad's family had gone. They weren't trying to get away, as far away as possible from me. But it was also a finishing school. So I went from baggy blue jeans and a slingshot in my pocket and hair in my face to a sophisticated environment. It was almost like gone with the wind, where I had to wear matching gloves and hats and the right clothes color for the right season. And as you can imagine, I felt like I was yanked out of my natural habitat. So I was really desperately, I thought I would die of homesickness. At the time, my higher power, like I said, was defined by what my parents had taught me. But I believe our higher power can reach us wherever we are and whenever we are ready. I have to thank my parents. They had demonstrated a devoted and consistent demonstration of their faith in their higher power. They called God. It was a good beginning, and I'm very grateful for that beginning. So in my desperation and my homesickness and desire to make friends, I began to pray and cry out to my higher power. My mother always thought that all things work together for good, and I think that became baked into me as a child, so I couldn't really help but believe at that point. So, but what if we don't know how to define our higher power? It was a new concept. Me define my higher power. It can be hard. We can only start where we are. And I would encourage us not to overthink it. I think it's really about the spiritual experience, not so much the exact words. And just as I recounted in my earlier conversation, it can grow and change, and I think it does for most of us. I'll talk a little bit about my higher power today. I believe in the mystery and the power in the universe. I believe that there is some mysterious power out there, in here, somewhere, maybe everywhere. I think of it a bit like breathing. A newborn baby does not have to understand how oxygen works in its lungs to take its first breath. And I have very limited understanding of how oxygen works in my lungs, but I enjoy deep breathing, especially when I'm hiking up a very steep mountain in Tucson, where we live. By the same token, I feel like my spiritual breathing, I don't need to over-define it, but I will talk a little bit about what my higher power means for me, keeping in mind this is for me and this is for now. One way I conceive of my higher power is my best self. It's that still small voice inside me that when I'm quiet and still, I can hear it. If I focus too much on some power that's out there and far away, then it triggers my fear that I need to appease some deity. But my best self, not my more immediate knee-jerk self, but that essence deep inside me that will speak to the wisdom if I'm quiet and listening and willing. And in my mind, really, I don't separate that really deep self. My religious training even told me that my higher power lived inside me. And I think if we become aligned and whole people, we can trust that our best self is not in conflict, but more in concert with our higher power. On the subject of belief systems, I have a story. I have a friend in Tucson. His name is Robert. And when he was 10 or 12, he went with his grandmother to a meeting where there was a Catholic priest, and the Catholic priest said to him, "So, if you don't know what you believe, please raise your hand." So he shot his hand up, and she quickly pushed it down, and she said, why are you raising your hand? And he said, because I don't know what I believe. And she said, no one does, and it doesn't matter. So, your story of higher power. And now we have Karen. Wait, is that who's coming up? Cindy. I'm sorry. And I'm just going to let you have the microphone here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Cindy. Good afternoon. And I am changing my title of a codependent. I'm a recovering, grateful codependent. A lot. I might have more the next time. My higher power has a different name. And I wanted to ask a couple people up front here because I'd be able to hear and I could say it. But what do you call your higher power?
Unknown.
How about you? God? God or universe? Universe. Okay. I have an unusual, it's none of those, so it's probably not, might be a few people in here that know this one. My God is called Gomu. Gomu. When I started reading a lot of what helped get me into CoDA, it was called the Course of Miracles. Some of you may recall that. And a lot of it had God of my understanding, God of my understanding, God of my understanding. I got tired of reading it. I thought, I got to shorten that. So I made it Gomu. That's how it started. I went to a convention one time, several years ago, and there was this rabbi, and he was doing some and does anybody else have another one of those? My Gomu, I put my hand up in the air. He brought the mic over. I said, okay, what is it? I said, it's Gomu. 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 And he was startled. He was startled. He okay, and he moved on. So the evening went by. The next morning, I'm having breakfast, sitting there with other people, and this rabbi comes up and he pulls a chair down next to me. He said, "Where'd you get that?" I said, I just got it because I had to do something with what I was reading all the time, God of my understanding. He said, I looked on the internet last night, and I couldn't find it anywhere. I said, it's because it's not anywhere. Started here. He said, can I use it? Because he was on tour. He's written books, all that. And I said, it's not mine. It's yours. You use Gomu. Okay, now that has grown in my life, the word Gomu. I don't know, I think we've met. Would you tell me your name? Tom. It expands to this. This is Tom of my understanding, Tomu. I make it what I want it to be, what I have spent time with you and learned about you. But I don't know everything about you. Is my time up? Is Gomu telling me my time is up? I guess that's what it is. Now, I could have, you get the gist. Oh, good, I'll keep going. Okay, let me say that you can use it in any way then. It can be an animal, it can be a person, it can be a place. It's always about Komu, Cindy of my understanding. Always trying to learn about myself, to be me. Who is that? And I have was so loving it so much that I made cards many years ago. It says, Gomu, God of my understanding, on the front, and on the back it says, to each their own. So if you want a card, I didn't bring all 1,000 of them with me, but I have cards. So thank you for letting me share about my Gomu. Gomu be with you.
Did you want this? Cindy, did you want this? Thank you very much, Cindy. Appreciate you sharing with us that. So, I guess I better turn this on for it to work. So, we need to improve our conscious contact with our higher power in order to become empowered. So why do we need to? Because we want power to change. Not the kind of power that helps us try to live somebody else's life, not the kind of power that tries to manage events around us, but the kind of power that is ours. The other day, I think we can stop and ask our higher power for help. The other day I was taking a long walk in the woods with my younger daughter. She was sharing with me some struggles that she's undergoing, and I started immediately to give her advice. I'm sure none of you have ever done that with your kids, but I did. I started to give her advice, and I could feel her shutting down. So I said to my higher power, I need wisdom. I need to know what to say, what not to say. And the answer came, shut up. Don't say anything. Just listen. And can everyone hear me? It feels like it's a little... So, as I shut my mouth and started to listen, she started to open up more and more and share with me the things that I wanted her to share with me. I have discarded some of my former beliefs about my higher power. The feeling that my higher power is going to require something of me that I hate. So I grew up in a missionary-minded environment, and I was always worried that my higher power was going to have me go to Africa as a missionary. And I did not want to go to Africa as a missionary. So, I don't believe that anymore. I think that as we become whole, integrated people, we can trust that our own heartfelt desires are in concert with our higher power as we are following our higher power. Another belief I've discarded is that I have to perform in some continuous way to get the approval and the help of my higher power. I also think that I don't believe that in the fearful way that I used to believe it. I do think that our choices have consequences. But when I'm willing to stop and follow my heart and listen, then my higher power's presence is right there for me. And just a brief word about willingness. This was a new concept for me. I don't know if anybody else has found it a new concept, but there's two steps. I'm trying to remember the first one. It was mentioned today. When we're ready, we need to become ready. That's a bit of being willing to have our defects removed. And then in step, 8, I wrote it down, that we need to be willing to be ready to make amends. And so I think it's amazing how willingness is an entire step of the process. If I think I need to do something and it's really hard for me to imagine doing it, I don't have to either say I'm not going to do it or imagine doing it or maybe even doing it badly. I can take a step back and just be willing. I can tell myself and my higher power that I am willing. And it's amazing in my experience how that brings the wisdom and the power to know and to be ready at the right time to do what I know I need to do. So what is the difference between powerlessness and empowerment? We talk a lot in CoDA about being powerless over others, and it's true. You know, I often think of what if we each had 10 cycles of energy to use every day? So if I use 8 or 9 of those to try to live your life or my husband's life or my kid's life, how many does that leave for me to focus on me and find my own power, my own empowerment? But it diminishes my empower. But when I let go of trying to be powerful where I'm not, then I experience the relief and the sudden ability to actually focus on what's mine to focus on. The power to change the things I can, which is me. I'm going to tell you a couple of stories of faith in my life. I had wonderful parents, as I say, that had a strong faith in their God. And I grew up with the feeling that my higher power was looking out for me, looking around corners for me, and guiding my life into my best future. I have 2 stories of faith that stand out in my memory. These are the dramatic ones, so that you realize that my life is not always like this for many years and decades. It's just a steady, my faith is sort of an underlying support. The first story is in 1971. I had a dream. It was December. This is the only dream I've ever had in my life that kind of really meant something important. In the dream, I was sitting on a couch at the edge of the room where people were milling around in a room, maybe about this size, and I was sitting there quietly staring straight ahead. My hands were beside me on the couch, and I became aware of someone coming up on the left-hand side of me. I'm still staring straight ahead and sitting down on the couch. In the dream, I'm still looking at the people making the meal until I felt a hand go over top of my left hand, and I turned and I said, "Oh, you're Michael Anderson. I know who you are." And most people did. I was a sophomore at the time in the school, and it was in Canada. It was near Calgary, the school we were going to. And I said, "I know who you are. You're Michael Anderson." Most people did. He was a senior vice president of the senior class, and he was often up front talking or singing in a singing group. In the dream, we got up together, walked down a hallway, stood looking out the window, and talked. And then I woke up. As I was still half asleep, I heard myself saying, "God, let me marry Michael Anderson." And then I said, "What did I just say? I mean, I don't even know this person, never met this person." And then I thought, it's just a dream. I put it out of my mind. I'm going to make a very long story short. Michael Anderson and I were married in August of 1972. My second story is fairly recent. It was early in the year 2019. In 1999, my husband and I had founded a national consulting business headquartered in Chicago. And we lived there for 45 years. And through the decades, the business had been growing quite nicely. And now, forward wind, about almost 20 years, we were in our late 60s, and we wanted to sell the business and retire. In 2017, we had moved to Tucson, and we had left a 4-person leadership team in control in Chicago. And we had tried to sell the company twice, most recently in 2018. We got very close, but the buyer backed out at the very last minute. In May of 2019, we went to headquarters. We went to Chicago. We had a leadership team meeting, and Michael and I walked out extremely disheartened. Things were going very badly. The leaders were fighting, morale was low, some of our best employees had left, and sales were down. Facing the truth, we both knew that we would never sell this company unless we did something drastic. We barely even knew what to do or quite how to do it. I wrote in my journal that we needed to make something order of magnitude happen, something big happen. Those were my words. I went back down to Chicago the day before we flew back to Tucson, and I walked into my office, which I wasn't using very much since I was in Tucson, and on the desk was a book, a book package, looked like a book. And I thought, that's funny. I always order my books to go to Tucson these days. So I opened the book, and you're not going to believe what the title of the book was. It was Making Big Happen, in all caps. So that, I was stunned. I looked through the book, and it turned out that 5 years previous, my husband had signed us up for a conference with 500 similar companies, and there was a speaker at the conference, and he had a fishbowl, and I had thrown my card into the fishbowl, and he had just published this book and sent his book out to the whole fishbowl list. I called this author, and long story short, he helped us find one of his consultants in Chicago whose specialty was to come and help companies turn around that were in trouble and re-strategize and grow their companies. So one of the things he helped us do was to find a CEO. We brought in a CEO, and that miracle person, I call him, joined us in late 2019, just in time to steer our company through the pandemic. And we had the best year ever in 2020, and he basically did all the work. He helped us sell the company in 2021 for more than we could have thought possible. So that was a story of faith. But like I say, most days, that's not the case with me. So, what does it mean to turn our will and lives over to the care of God? Let's talk a little bit about this. If there's a higher power, and if he, as we know there is, and if he is all-wise, and if he knows us and the future better than we do, then why would we not turn our will and lives over to him, her, it, them, who knows? But first, I want to talk just about what surrender is not. Too often in the past, surrender meant letting my parents tell me what I should be doing, even as an adult, surrendering to some religious teacher's view of what I should be doing. So I happened to gain a reputation of not being very submissive. My mother said to me, "Kay, your problem is I never broke your will." Well, thank goodness she didn't. Another time she said, "If you don't learn to obey your father, how are you ever going to learn to obey your husband?" I'm serious. Speaking of father, my dad was a freedom-loving wilderness pioneer. He used to sing an old Bing Crosby song. I don't think he applied it to his religious or spiritual life, but I think it's appropriate. As a kid, I was my dad's shadow. And I remember him singing this song as he took me with him on his dog team trips, or as he built one of 3 different log cabins that we lived in. And the first verse goes like this: "Oh, give me land, lots of land, under starry skies above. Don't fence me in. Let me ride through the wide open country that I love. Don't fence me in. Let me be by myself in the evening breeze and listen to the murmur of the cottonwood trees. Send me off forever, but I ask you please, don't fence me in." That's been my theme song. When my husband and I moved to Chicago in 1972, I guess it was, we went one day to walk in the Arboretum, and it was closed. And I said to myself, "How can you close the woods?" So I climbed over the fence, and we took a walk anyway. I guess that was a case of don't fence me out. So submission has never been one of my primary characteristics, and now, for that I am grateful. I guess I was following my heart even back then. So surrender does not mean blind faith and overriding our own best judgment. There's danger in that. We've all heard of people becoming seduced by strange and harmful cults. In fact, I was thrilled the other morning in my Saturday CoDA meeting back in Tucson when a young woman shared that she had recently come to CoDA and that she had been just about to join a cult. And she said, I now know it was a cult. But she said, when I came to CoDA and I heard about how I should trust myself, I backed away from that. We were so thrilled. So then, what does it mean to turn our will and our lives over to the higher power? Let's talk about proper surrender. A huge part of surrender for me is acceptance. I don't have to understand to accept. Accepting life as it comes, accepting the cards I've been dealt with in life, and not comparing my situation always to that of others. Submitting to my higher power's laws is one of the ways I surrender to my higher power. How many of us have to surrender to the law of gravity? I didn't once, and I actually broke my hip. This was a long time ago. I have a fake hip. We have to, otherwise it will be disastrous if we don't. So then, just as there are physical laws in the universe, I believe there are social, emotional, and spiritual laws that we must surrender to, and sometimes it takes work to discover those and work to surrender to them. I believe that love is one of these. We all know that if we hate someone, it hurts the person hating more than the person hated. Are we willing to surrender to love? We were talking about gravity. The exciting thing that alongside gravity is the law of aerodynamics. How many of you still wonder, every time I see you all flew here in one of these big chunks of steel, or many of you did, and every time I see it get off the ground, or I'm inside of it and it gets off the ground, don't you still wonder, like, how does this work? It's the law of aerodynamics. So I ask myself, what are the spiritual laws like aerodynamics that can help me overcome the things in life that pull me down and keep me trapped in my codependence? What are the laws I can surrender to with gladness and confidence that can help us do that? As we say in our meetings, we have all learned to survive life, but in CoDA we are learning to live life. So let's talk a bit about us. To thine own self be true. I love these words, and we have them on the CoDA chips, the CoDA logo. Let's explore some of the ways in which we can become more and more true to ourselves. Oops, that's my phone. I turn that off. I know a new love and acceptance of myself. I feel genuinely loving, lovable, loving, and loved. I left out the part about others because we're going to talk about that in the section 3. The CoDA promises are some of my favorite readings in CoDA. We went to a wonderful workshop yesterday about that. Cindy. You know, I'm having trouble with this thing. I'm not used to this. I'm going to see what I can do so that I can see my book. Maybe lower it a little. Yeah. And turn it that way so that I can see the book. You see the book. I think that's better. Yeah. Better? Yeah. We'll work with this for a few minutes and see how it works. Yeah, it's better. So isn't this why we're here? Because we want to become more lovable people, loving to ourselves. You know, this was kind of a new concept to me to love myself. I mean, so much of my religious teaching and environment seemed to be telling me to not think about myself and not worry about myself and not think about others first, always, right? So this was a bit, it takes work to be true to ourselves, and it takes courage, and it takes stepping out of our comfort zone. And sometimes we have to deprogram those deeply ingrained beliefs of our own low opinion of ourselves. But this is what the CoDA steps are all about. As the preamble says, we gather together to support and share with each other in a journey of self-discovery, learning to love the self. Let's talk about how we travel this journey. So we're going to discuss, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story, and then we're going to discuss some low self-esteem patterns, and then we're going to talk about a little bit more about what it means to love the self. It was 1968, and I was 19 years old, recently graduated from high school. I had no plans for college. Unlike my brother who went to college, I assumed that I was just going to get married and have kids and stay home. But I had no marriage prospects. So my dad found this really nice one-year religious school in the northern part of England. So I went there, and recovering a bit by now from my extreme shyness when I was 15 and went out to that Florida school, I was learning to make friends. In fact, I started having an absolute blast. There were 10 of us that hung out. We would pile into the president's son's Austin Mini on 2 layers of us. And we would gallivant in the storybook northern England countryside into castles for scones and cream, and to Lancaster, Manchester. We even went to London once, 8 of us in his little car. But then, right after Christmas, it hit me. Guilt, soul-crushing guilt and shame. Who was I to be having so much fun? Why was I so superficial and unspiritual? Why wasn't I praying more, reading the Bible more, thinking about converting the lost world and not tasting my first wine and having such a blast? I sunk into a very deep depression. I did not laugh for 3 months. I put my parents' pictures away and disconnected from my friends. I didn't know what hit me. Later, they told me they couldn't reach me. The teachers were concerned. I went one day to talk to a teacher, and I walked out saying, he can't help me. Nobody understands me. But I did pray. I wandered the countryside. I cried out to God. Each morning, I dreaded getting out of bed and facing the day. I had become afraid to look people in the eye because I figured they could see my worthless soul. But one morning, about 3 months later, a change came, a transformation came. This is probably the only time in my life where the recovery, if you will, was night and day, like flipping a switch. It was the morning. It was almost as if an audible voice said to me, Kay, get up, get out of bed, go down to breakfast and look people in the eye. You are worthy. That's about all I can remember of the message. But that was the morning of transformation for me. My friends could immediately see the change. They came back and reconnected and asked me what had been happening. But as I say, that was only the beginning. That was 1969. And I have to say, it really wasn't until I came to CoDA in 2016 that I was helped to realize that it was okay to love myself. And not only was it okay, it was mandatory. It was my job. It was my spiritual path to be true to myself. But I do believe that was my higher power leading me out of that deep depression back then. It was almost like a seed was planted back then. And reading the low self-esteem patterns when I first came to CoDA was a lightning bolt recognition for me. Let's look at a few of those. Codependents often do not perceive themselves as lovable or worthwhile persons. I'm just discovering that it's not only people who stare at their shoes and don't have good jobs that have low self-esteem. I have a trainer in Tucson, and I work out with her, and she's amazing. She's the best. Everybody at the club knows if you work out with Mary, you've got the best. But one day, she even said one time to me, she said, yeah, I stay awake at night strategizing on exercises I can put together to help one of my clients with their pain or with their problem. But one day, just kind of out of the blue, she said, yeah, I've always thought of myself as pretty much an unlovable person. And I was just stunned. Somebody so competent, so much that I enjoyed being with, would say that. It made me sad. So how do we move to the right-hand side and recognize ourselves as being lovable and valuable? We'll talk about some of the ways. Codependents often look to others to provide their sense of safety. I remember when I first went out to boarding school, I would follow around the girls that I thought had it all together. I would try to imitate them, even to their hairstyle. Why do we continually compare ourselves to others? Isn't it because we're trying to feel good about ourselves in possibly the wrong way? The program of Codependence Anonymous can help us create our own sense of safety if we're willing to do the work. I have a CoDA friend who's such an example of availing herself of every tool in the CoDA toolbox. She works the steps, she has a sponsor, she goes to meetings, reads the literature, talks to CoDA friends, and she's recently, well, the other morning she texted me, "Good morning, Kay. I'm up working the steps and doing grateful and serenity prayers. I'm enjoying new levels of growth that are wonderful and deeply challenging at the same time." She's in a brand new intimate relationship, which she's had an impossible time in her past, and she's always longed for that. So I asked her how that was going, and she said, "Wonderfully, thanks to my CoDA program." Codependents often have trouble setting healthy priorities and boundaries. I have a friend, I'll call her Joan, who has been married for many years to her husband I will call Ralph. Ralph often dictated the terms of their trips. They would travel a lot. And Joan had some health issues, but when she wanted to stop, sometimes Ralph would say, no, we're going to keep going. He was a CEO of a company and a very commanding and powerful man. So as she continually disregarded herself and her needs, he became even more harsh and demanding. When I first met them, I thought he was pretty much of a jerk. She once told me that even in her own house, she would pace around and around her kitchen island being intimidated by him, like a caged animal. But after attending CoDA for just a couple of years, she told me a very different story. They were about to embark on a long road trip from Tucson to the East Coast. And before they went, she sat down and she said, "Ralph, if I get exhausted and we're traveling, and you won't stop when I need to stop, I'm going to get out of the truck. I'm going to take the first flight home." And she meant it, and apparently he knew it. She told me later it was one of the best trips they'd had. And then what's more is that when my husband and I got together with them another time, I thought, he can actually be a really nice person. He actually was supportive of her. Because if we disregard ourselves, we just teach others to do that, and we bring out the worst from others. And, of course, it works the other way around, as it did for her. In recovery, I can establish and uphold healthy priorities and boundaries, just as my friend Joan was doing. Let me see where I'm at. Codependents often perceive themselves as superior to others. And I think I used religion in my past to try to feel superior to others, and I'm quite sure it was because I felt inferior to others. In recovery, I perceive myself as equal to others. I remember this phrase really piercing me deeply. For so many years, my natural instinct was to analyze people in order to figure out who was better, who was worse. And what a relief it was to hear and to feel that we're all equal. And now we're going to have David Mick come and share with us the story of learning to love yourself. Thank you, David. And Michael will be timing that.
Sorry, horse and bear, for dropping you. My name's David Mick. I'm from Fort Worth, Texas. I'm a delegate for Texas. And my wife was reminding me to get closer to the mic, like when we sing sometimes. So, those of you who have been here at the CSC have seen me this week with my horse. And I had a Canadian cowboy hat, too, to honor our host. So learning to love myself. Many years ago, my core belief was, I am a worthless piece of shit. I started seeing a therapist. And he practiced a therapy called transactional analysis, which that's when people heard about inner child and inner parent, that's where it came from, Eric Berne. After about 3 years, I'm like, man, this is helping a lot. I decided to start training to be a therapist. And then in 1988, I went to a conference in Asilomar, California. The theme was, who's your therapist? So when people ask me about therapists, I go, when you go to find one, ask them, have they had any therapy? If they say no, run. So my therapist, I went in there, and I'm a mess, and he explained all these things to me about the parent parts, the adult parts, the child parts. And he said, David, you have a very angry and sometimes vengeful child that you're exhibiting. And then he said, the flip side of that is you have a very tender, loving child. And that child part of us, that's the original part in my belief. It's the creative part. It's the part of us that is in awe of things. And so I began getting in touch with my child part because I had been numbing myself, both my physical and emotional feelings. I was a fighter for several years, 25 years, but kickboxer, karate fighter. And of course, I learned in sports, I learned how to numb myself. Because when you get hit, you don't let your opponent know it hurts, because they're going to keep on nailing the same spot. Well, emotionally, in my family, if I let someone know I was hurt, guess what? The same emotional jab would happen. So I began learning how to love myself. I shared in my workshop about reparenting myself. I began that in early 1990. 3 times a day, I'd write and create affirmations and affirmations. Did that for 3 years every day without fail. Now, I didn't have to do it 3 times a day. I chose to. You know, if somebody works on themselves for 30 minutes a day, it makes a world of difference. Because all these thoughts, is that for me? No. All these thoughts are so automatic. It's like the ABCs. They're automatic. We learn them at a young age, and it's just over and over. So learning to love myself, when I made a decision to go see a therapist, okay, and I made a lot of changes. But also when I went to that conference in '88, I realized, you know what, I have some more work to do. And my teacher, is that me? Okay, yeah. So, you know, I decided not to practice therapy. I needed to do more work. And that's when, and then I got into 12-step recovery because I needed that spiritual connection. So George Benson did a song many years ago. Whitney Houston did it later. Learning to love yourself is the greatest love of all. Go listen to it. Listen to some positive, uplifting music. Have fun. That is loving myself. Go moo. That's what one cow said to the other. People ask me, what's the name of your horse? It doesn't have a horse, because I came to the desert on a horse with no name. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David, for sharing with us. So, this is from the CoDA preamble. And we gather together to support each other in a journey of self-discovery, learning to love the self. We have a little toy poodle. I think she's right there. And one day I noticed her chewing on her paw and almost making it raw. And I thought, oh, she must have one of those sharp pieces of desert grass that from some of our hikes. She's actually in pretty good shape. She goes on 3-hour hikes with me. So I used a magnifying glass, and I carefully extracted the grass and from her paw, and I was just cherishing and taking care of her little paw. And it suddenly occurred to me that when I was a kid, I used to really badly bite my fingernails. And I thought, and sometimes I still do, and I thought, why am I so cherishing her? Why can't I cherish my own paws as much as hers? So that's something we need to learn, right? Caring for ourselves. And I'm sorry, I'm keep fiddling with this, but it's sitting in front of my eyes. First of all, never, ever shame ourselves. Never let ourselves be shamed. But someone might be saying, well, what if I've done something wrong? What if I've done something shameful? Yeah, well, when someone, let's say someone is criticizing me. Let's say we're having a conflict and someone is criticizing me and shaming me. Sometimes in my codependence, I think, yeah, they're probably right. It's probably my fault. But then I get defensive, and then I start criticizing them. So instead of doing that, what I try to do now is step back. And yes, okay, let's say I did something that was triggering. Let's say I do need to make an apology, but not at the moment, not when I'm feeling shamed. So shame is poison, and I'm not going to take a sip of it. So I wait until I've removed myself, until I've calmed and got my equilibrium and gotten myself back to a state of self-esteem. Then I can go back to the person and say, and this doesn't, exonerate what they did maybe, but I'm working on me. So I go back and I say, okay, I think I did some things that really triggered you, or what is it? And get some feedback so that I can take responsibility for my side of it, for my defects. And then if I'm working from a loving place, I can lovingly share with them what maybe they did. Sometimes I would say, would you like some feedback? And if the person says sure, then I can share in a loving way, not shaming them again. So that's one way. And allowing myself to feel my feelings. So a quote from the denial pattern says, I embrace my feelings. They are valid and important. I once had a problem in a relationship. Something happened, and I called my sponsor, and I said, how should I be feeling about this? And she said, no, not how should you be. How do you feel? How are you feeling? And that's kind of a new, I was raised by, my father is wonderful, and I adored him, but his family was sort of a Downton Abbey family. They were kind of a stiff upper lip English family. So caring a lot about my feelings and paying much attention to them has been a new concept for me. Also, patience with our defects. What do we say in the program? Progress, not perfection. Now, here's another way to do it. I think someone mentioned this morning affirmations. I dare you to try staying in a low, miserable place and writing a list of things you're thankful for. And writing a list of things that you are when you are your best. For example, I'm sure everybody knows and uses affirmations. Maybe an affirmation that says, I am loving and grateful. I attract good people and good things into my life. If we do those things, it's pretty hard to stay in a miserable place. So daily building our self-esteem is the work that we have to do. And as we respect ourselves, we teach others to respect us. Our attitude towards ourselves really transmits to others. So let's never doubt it. This is our job, no one else's, to stay in a place of self-love, From one of my CoDA readings, it said, do not give up. It takes time to get self-love into the core of us. It takes repeated practice. If we want to become a musician, as you said, kickboxing, what do we have to do? We have to practice. The same thing with loving ourselves. So let's talk about the third section here. Let's talk about others. We can't have a healthy and loving relationship all by ourselves. A friend once said to me, actually a friend who was a therapist said, any family with more than one person in it is dysfunctional. So we often have trouble interacting in a healthy way. I know a new love and acceptance of others. I feel genuinely lovable, loving, and loved. As we develop the connection with our higher power, as we develop the connection with ourselves, as we begin to feel good about ourselves, it begins to naturally happen that we start to feel better about others and we start to care about others. And we all want to take care of our defects and become the people who attract good relationships into our lives. We want healthy interdependence, not codependence. So we're going to talk about coming to believe in a power that helps us get out of our insanity, characteristics of healthy and loving relationships, and manageability around setting boundaries. So, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. When I first read this, I was rather insulted. I'm like, I may need some help, but I'm not that badly off. But I have to say this has become one of my favorite steps because I will tell you a few stories about how I really did feel insane in the moment, sometimes between two choices and both of them seem wrong to me. That to me is lack of clarity. I think someone this morning said something about the more they work the steps and grow in CoDA, they have a clearer way of thinking. And that's been so true for me. So let's take a closer look at some of the ways that codependents act. And you tell me if you don't think these are insane. Attempted to use others, our mates, friends, and even our children as our sole source of identity. How does this sound like the road to good relationships? How does it feel if someone is clingy and possessive of you and tries to use you for their own ends, their own sense of well-being? You hate it, right? So then how is that the right way to do things? In fact, that is acting in ways that invite others to shame and reject them, express anger. When I first read this, I thought, well, why would anyone do that? I'm sure I don't do that. But staying in the program opens us up to things we never thought possible before, things that help us find the way through that confusion to understanding how we're doing those very same things. Lack empathy for the feelings and needs of others. Do you want to have a relationship with someone who doesn't care about your feelings, who doesn't have any empathy for you, doesn't care about your needs? Pull people toward them, but when they get close, push them away. How is this sane? How can you build a satisfying relationship at all with someone that keeps pushing you away? And I'm sure this is driven by fear. The familiarity of being isolated and pushing people away is driven by fear of intimacy, but also the desire for intimacy. So that's another little piece of insanity, isn't it? Judge others harshly in order to feel superior. Especially in my past, my holier-than-thou attitude put people off. Every year, I'll tell you a little story. Every year, 7 of us girl cousins on my dad's side, there are 7 girl cousins. We get together every year for a little reunion. And I've been able to connect pretty well with all of them except one, and I'll call her Jill. And I've always thought, I've been critical of Jill. Like, why is she so sensitive? Why is she so emotional? Why isn't she tougher? And I'm sure that came through to her. You know how we think comes through to people because we just never really hit it off that well. But this year, Jill texted all of us and said, I'm not coming to the reunion. My first split-second thought was maybe that's just as well. And then my next thought was recovery. I actually surprised myself by a bit of recovery. I thought, that's sad. I felt sad. And I felt compassion for her. So I called her up and I had a nice long chat with her and she so appreciated it. I said, you really need to come. It's not going to be the same without you. And after I hung up, I thought how much better that felt than the way I'd been feeling before, many years ago even, the negative critical thoughts that I had towards her. Pretend, comply, capitulate, and then become angry and resentful. When we're not our true selves, we hurt our opportunities for healthy interactions with others. Recently, I was getting to know a new... How are we doing for time, by the way? Are we... Oh, okay, so we got time. We're good. So Joyce is a CoDA member in one of my... It's not her real name. And I got to know her. She's much younger than I am. We really hit it off. We had both loved nature. We both love hiking, went on some hikes. And then another young woman, I'll call her Carrie, came into Tucson. She just moved into Tucson. She was considering CoDA. And I thought, you know, she was about the age of Joyce. And I thought, you know, I think I'd like to set up a coffee and get us three together. So I asked Joyce, I said, how about a coffee? And she didn't seem to be reluctant. She said, okay. So I set the coffee up and I thought it went well. But about a week or two later, Joyce just blew up at me and lashed out at me. And I said, what's going on? It seemed out of the blue. And when we talked more, she said, I just really resented that you set that coffee up. It turned out she didn't want to share me with Carrie. She was possessive. And I said, you know, I just wish you had said something like, I'm just not available for that coffee, rather than say yes and then just be angry and resentful. And you know, the ironic thing is, it really sort of put me off of Joyce. And I'm not sure that we can have the kind of relationship, at least right now, that she would like to have. I couldn't help but remember the last of the denial patterns. I pursue intimate relationships only with others who want and are able to engage in healthy and loving relationships. And I'm afraid Joyce hurt herself by not being true to herself. And I've reached out to her since and tried to prepare that, but it hasn't really been easy. I'm still there for her if she ever wants to, you know, keep going with our relationship. But we do need to be true to ourselves or it comes out the wrong way. So, codependents often get it inside out. By helping, we might be hurting, and sometimes by really helping, it can feel like hurting. So sometimes it's just inside out and upside down. And I'll give you a couple of examples. When I was in my early 40s, my husband and I both had demanding jobs and 3 kids, 3 teenagers. My son, I'll call him Nathan, was probably in the 8th or 9th grade. He had a bad tendency to procrastinate telling me what he needed for school until the very last minute when he might have known for a week. And so it was late in the afternoon and we were driving home from football practice, and the suburb that we lived in was the traffic was very bad. And one of the things we tried to do as a family was sit down for dinner, and my husband was a minister at the time, and so he had the daytime duty. If the kids forgot something at school, he was there. I worked downtown Chicago all day, and then I came back late afternoon, and it was my turn in the evening. So I was trying to get home and make dinner. And as Nathan and I approached the intersection where I would normally turn left and go home, Nathan suddenly said, "Oh, Mom, I need some special construction paper for my art project. And I need to go, turn this way, turn right." And I said, well, how long have you known this, Nathan? Well, he sheepishly said that he'd known it for a few days. So I remember feeling insane. Either I had two bad choices. Either I go home and respect the rest of the family's time, and then he would be angry at me. He would be unhappy. He might fail his course. I'd be a bad mom. I literally thought I'd be a bad mom doing that. Or I could do what he wanted, but then I would be impacting the rest of the family. Well, guess what I did? I turned right. I went and I took the time. And why did I do that? Because I was afraid. I was afraid to let him experience the result of his own bad choices. I was afraid of his anger, his displeasure. I didn't want him to get a bad grade, as if it was my responsibility. And I was afraid of being a bad mom. Well, a little P.S. Our son today is a wonderful, loving 47-year-old man with a great relationship with both of us. And I guess somewhere along the way we learned a little bit more about setting boundaries. So what are some of the characteristics of good relationships? I love this one. I communicate with my family in a way that is safe for me and respectful of them. How do we do this? Especially if our family has a history of saying cutting and hurtful things, or maybe giving the silent treatment for days. It can be really hard for us not to be triggered and do the same thing in return, especially with our family where we have grown up, doing it to each other back and forth. And some of us, have such deeply dysfunctional families that in our recovery, especially early, we may have to take a step back. We may have to distance ourselves from our family. But I think ultimately the goal is to be able to realize this promise, because it's for our own spiritual and emotional health and for theirs. A lot of times this is about setting boundaries and speaking our truth, and sometimes we get into either or thinking again. I can't have both my safety and respect for you. But CoDA teaches us otherwise. Let's talk about some of the ways. So, be loving and direct. Regardless of how managed by their defects they are being, we have to commit to two things. And I put loving first, because I think if we get the right attitude towards someone, then when we speak our truth, it's not going to come out in a cutting and harsh way. So my husband has a phrase he says sometimes when there's a difficult situation, difficult person, disagreeable person maybe, he says, bless them. So if you say to yourself before you talk to someone, bless that person, it's going to be really hard to be nasty and cutting. We must never shame them any more than we allow them to shame us. There's something else that's really easy. I don't know, our family can do this. We can get into this when we're not doing so well. Labeling and diagnosing. You're just a selfish narcissist. How many people do you know that can diagnose people as narcissists when they're not even a therapist and they don't even have the ability? So labels, diagnoses, it's just so damaging. It's so diminishing of the other person. And for me, it's about remembering to stay in my own skin, say my truth, how am I feeling? And let them learn their lessons in their own time, in their own way. At the end of CoDA, it says, my communication with, at the end of the pattern, the control patterns, it says, my communication with others is authentic and truthful. Easily said, not sometimes so easily done. Another way to do this that has helped me is asking myself the right questions. In lots of areas of life, I ask myself questions. When I was growing the business, I used to ask myself, how can I get the business to this point? Or how can I... Sometimes I'll ask myself about one of my daughter having a hard time, or my son, and I'll say, how can I be the best help to my daughter? I think if we ask ourselves the right questions, our subconscious and our higher power can help us answer them in the right way. So instead of saying to yourself, how can I get this person to change? How can I get this person to quit doing XYZ and start doing ABC? Then maybe ask, how can I be kind and loving? How can I say something wise and helpful to this person? I think, and here we are talking too about our conscious contact, as Mary was talking this morning. I think if we stop even in the conversation and whisper to ourselves, to our higher power, how can I say something true and kind? We will get the answer. A story. So for a couple of years, beginning in 2021, our son worked for our daughter, his older sister. And one day he was over at the house. He was complaining to me about something she was doing that was frustrating and annoying him. And I interrupted him. And I said, "You're talking to the wrong person. Have you talked to her about this?" "Oh, no," he said. "It wouldn't do any good. She won't change." Well, I ask you, do we speak our truth to others so that it will change them somehow? No. We speak our truth because it's good for us to do so, because we want to be transparent, and we do love them. And sure, when we speak our truth, it can give someone an opportunity to see something and learn, but it's still up to them. The other, a quick story about my mother. I learned this. You know, my mother had this bad habit. I loved her dearly, but my mom had a bad habit. Maybe she was ADD, I wonder. But in the middle of an important situation or conversation, she would say, could you fix that curtain? It's a little crooked. And it was so frustrating. So when I was younger, I just kind of didn't share with her. I just kind of gave up. Like, well, I'm just not going to share with Mom because she's so, distracted and doesn't listen that well. But when I got older and I was in CoDA and I really did love her. I remember one time I was trying to share something important to me and emotional, and she did the same thing. She's like, something like, "Phil," that's my dad, "can you fix your collar? It's kind of up in the back." And I said, "Mom, I was trying to share something really important and sensitive and emotional, and you're being distracted about Dad's collar." And she goes, oh, I'm so sorry. Please try again." So she didn't want to be that way, and I was giving her the opportunity to back up and try again. And to me, that's loving. Forgive and don't keep score. My dad taught me this. He was talking to me about commitment in marriage, and I'm thinking, how do we know the score anyway, unless we're God? Because we always give ourselves more of a break than we give others. So I've remembered this in my 52 years of marriage. I try not to keep score. And the other part of not keeping score, well, and when I think of someone else's shortcomings and I'm annoyed, I often stop and think of mine. And it helps me to forgive. And right alongside of forgiveness is not holding a grudge. One small note of caution here. I'm not talking about a situation where there's continual abuse, continually putting someone down. That's when we have to take care of ourselves, and that's not the same as what I'm talking about here. Okay, setting boundaries. Everybody can do this easily, right? Nobody has any trouble ever setting boundaries. So one of the things I think about is the paradox, the sort of the tightrope we need to walk when we set boundaries. So in my experience, if I can come down on one side or the other, so if I can get angry enough with somebody, I might be able to set a boundary, what I think is a boundary, but then really, if it's fueled by anger, it's really more of a punishment or retaliation. Or if I can withdraw and just give up on them, then I can set a boundary, but that's more often a wall than a boundary, than a loving boundary. And it creates resentment. But on the flip side, if I am too focused on the other person's hurt, maybe almost too empathetic, if you will, too caretaking, as we all talk about having problems with, then I become afraid of their reaction to the boundary. I want to rescue them, and then I'm more likely to capitulate into not setting a boundary. So, staying in the middle is the hardest part. We need to stay connected. It's hard to stay connected and loving and caring, but also firm in our resolve to set that boundary that we know we need to set. Maybe I don't set a boundary with a child because I'm too empathetic. I often have this feeling that our defects are just misapplied strengths. So one of the things I was good at with my kids was feeling like a kid, remembering what it was like to be a kid. And that's good until it makes me afraid and makes me turn right instead of left. Or was I anticipating a nice day with someone, and then that someone does something that requires me to care for myself and set a boundary, which means it's inconvenient for me and I have to deny myself that time with them? So setting boundaries can be hard work. Let's remember that recovery is work. It may be uncomfortable. We do have to step out of our comfort zone. We talked a little about being willing. And again, if we're having trouble with that boundary, if we're having trouble imagining ourselves setting that boundary, we can tell our higher power that we're willing, and we can wait until, we don't have to hurry and do it, maybe. We can wait until it becomes more organic and our higher power gives us the power to do that. Again, let's talk about staying with, when we set a boundary, not using, you did this, you are wrong. But so instead of saying, I'm sorry, but I'm just not available to sit here while you criticize me, we can turn around and get defensive and criticize them, but that's not what we need to do. We need to stay with us. We need to keep our side of the street clean, as we say in the program. When someone we love and someone we expect to love us hurts us or does hurtful things, it's important to take a step back, take that pause, connect with our higher power, and ask, help me to respond with courage and love. And then let go of them and what they're doing. And now we have Terry to talk with us about a story of setting boundaries. Thank you, Terry. Sure. This one? And by the way, I'll tell everybody, at the end, I'm going to leave my email and phone number, and if anybody wants a copy of everything, including the notes, I'm happy to send it out.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Terry, and I am a, what am I now? I keep hearing options. I'm me. I'm just me. Not perfect, but I am. I'm a child of a great creator. I'm a child of whatever I want to call myself. I'm me. And I claim it. I even draw little bears. See? She asked us to talk about boundaries, and I said, oh, okay. That's all I heard. I had not contemplated in my brain. But I was writing notes while she was speaking. And in our household, we use, perhaps you're right. And then I get a, perhaps you're wrong. And we let it go. And then we come back, if it comes back up, and we discuss it. It's a little bit different. It's a don't put the energy in it. We have an unsaid, we don't call each other names. Rarely. That's a key. Because for me, if somebody points a finger at me, oh man, that energy of that, it's like in the old cartoons you see, and the lightning comes out of the finger. And it hits right in here, as I guess my little girl thought, oh, okay. Or the lightning in the storm. But that dissonance in my body. So I can usually go, it's not about me, it's not about me, it's not about me. Living with the same man for 29 years, yeah. We have to agree to disagree on certain things like numbers. It's okay. One main thing is we use the word very carefully. Let's see. Let's see. I'm taking a breath here. The word no is a very, very important word. Sometimes it really doesn't mean no, and that's acceptable. And sometimes I can't find the word at all. And I don't know that I could use that word, no. I feel, okay, I'm a codependent. I come and go from my little girl sometimes. You know, I was the youngest in my family, and I wasn't allowed to say no. So that wasn't something that I could grasp. Even with my first two husbands, I didn't know how to say no. Coming into CoDA and actually going into AA first, I learned how to say no to alcohol. I learned how to say no to pot. I learned how to say no to my girlfriends that were always partying in Los Angeles when I lived there. Slowly bringing on the boundaries. It's kind of like not an armor, because the armor protected me. Got it, 3 minutes. The armor that I had was more of a fantasy armor, you know, big time fantasy armor. But the reality was, when I got down to it, got a good therapist. Sherry Tips, I'm saying that because she is passed. She made a big difference in my county when I moved to Fort Worth. She was amazing. We did the workshop just a second earlier. In her workshop, and I remember this many, many years ago, we had a walkthrough. And the song, "How could anyone ever tell you you were anything less than beautiful?" We did a walkthrough, one person at a time. And we were able to say, okay, we'll take that in. And that was what we took with us that day. So I take her with me always. Thanks for letting me share.
Thank you very much, Terry, for your share. We appreciate all three of you being able to join us in that. So as we wrap up here, I just want to talk about the takeaways that we've talked about already. I guess I better turn this down a little. Let's remember to connect with our higher power in our own way and in our own time, not someone else's. Let's remember, first and foremost, the most important person to love is ourselves first. It's like the flight attendant that tells us to put our oxygen mask on before we help another. And finally, let's find the courage to step out of our comfort zone and love others so that we can find those and enjoy those deeply satisfying relationships. Thank you again for letting me share. Thank you for being here. And this is my number and email. I'll leave it here for a bit, and you can email me if you'd like any of the materials, and I'll send them out to you. Thank you.